Hi, I'm Brett. This is another episode of Broadway Life where we teach you how to get a Broadway life. And today's guest is my friend, Jonathan Freeman.
Hi, Brett.
Tell the people what you do.
Hello, Mr. Shuford. Right now I'm playing Jafar on Broadway in Aladdin, and it's a role that I helped to create 27 years ago for the film of Aladdin for Disney.
Well, how long have you been doing the show on Broadway now?
It's about 4.5 years on Broadway.
So what is it like to revisit a character 23 years later, and then to continue to play that character 8 shows a week?
Well, it's unusual. I'm venturing a guess that there's not that many people that have had the opportunity to do that. You know, there was a guy at the turn of the century named William Gillette who played Sherlock Holmes for the greater part of his career. Carol Channing, as we know, played Dolly Levi for a huge quantity of her career. Yul Brynner did the King and I for a big. You know, there have been people that have played characters for a long time. I think I am the only voice of a Disney character who's brought that character to another medium. I think that's a first. It's interesting. So it's interesting to be able to sort of do different things with the same character, bend it a little bit. Well, on the first day of rehearsal, I walked into a room and there was nobody in the room who was connected to the Aladdin that I started working on in 1991, except for Alan Menken. He was the only other person in the room that either could still do their role or wanted to or was still alive. So it was a little weird. I mean, I thought maybe I've made a mistake, maybe I shouldn't be doing it. I really wasn't sure that after so many years I could actually recreate my character in a way that would sort of fit with everything else. And I feel lucky to have been able to. There's going to come a time, you know, probably sooner than later, when I'm going to have to pass the turban to somebody else anyway.
So when did you make your Broadway debut?
1975.
What was the show?
It's called Sherlock Holmes. It was a play version of Sherlock Holmes.
You weren't trained in musical theater, you were classically trained?
My training, I mean, it started when I was a kid because I started acting. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and there were a lot of theaters there that I worked in starting at about the age of 10. In the 60s, the late 60s, playing Marcellus Washburn in Music Man, and Tommy Kirk, who was a big Disney star, was played Harold Hill.
Wow.
So I had a lot of different venues. So I did grow up doing musical theater in that particular case, and I did American Repertory and a couple plays at Cleveland Playhouse, and children's theater. I did basically the same thing I'm doing now, playing ridiculous character parts and villains, and so I would say in a way that was my real training. And I took classes. I started taking acting classes when I was pretty young. And when you start when you're young, it's usually called creative dramatics. And then we had a wonderful teacher named Marilyn Bianchi who turned us around and said, you know, well, it's been a lot of fun, and however, you may like to know that if you actually wanted to pursue acting as a career, as an adult and for real life, you can do that. Suddenly it was a little more serious.
But you did go to college.
I went to college for 4 years and to an actor training program at Ohio University. There was a wonderful acting coach named Robert Hobbs. I wanted to work with him because I knew I wanted to be professional long before I got into college, and so I knew that if I didn't get real training, you know, because let's face it, I mean, there are people that are, you know, discovered overnight and become big stars on TV or something like that. I just sort of knew that wasn't going to be my path. I knew that I had to get training and I had to get better, and I graduated school in 1972. There were really only two choices at the time, so it seemed, for me, which was Los Angeles or New York. I grew up
and you love New York.
I do love New York, yeah. I can't really imagine living in very many other places.
Sure. How do you see Broadway has changed since 1975 to where it is now, and in what ways do you think you've noticed it?
In some ways it has not changed. In some ways I think it's always been, there's certain elements that have stayed the same. It's always been difficult to break into. It's always been difficult to stick with it. I'm sure it was always difficult to do 8 performances a week. there's some things that have not changed, that have stayed the same, and some of those things are, it's good things, most of them. I think the biggest change that I see is what can survive in New York at this point, number one. It seemed to me at the time you could do a play and it could survive for a number of years. These days it seems like primarily it's only musicals, big musicals that survive that have legs, as they say, as they used to say, and they still say it, I guess. Although there are exceptions, there's always exceptions to the rule, but I think that I also feel like the business, not just Broadway, but television and film, became very much more celebrity-centric. Keep a show running and to make enough money because costs escalated,
Yeah.
Either I haven't noticed or I have noticed and they've been so horrible I've put it away, or you have to just sort of keep going forward if you want to do it, I guess. There's not really any looking back. It doesn't help, I don't find.
Well, what helps you get through an 8-show week at this point? You've been doing it for so long.
I just have to have a conversation with myself that I started having with myself, quite a while ago, but I remind myself that there are people in the audience who have never seen a Broadway show before. There are people in the audience who've saved up money to come buy expensive tickets to sit in the theater to, see a Broadway show. Probably given up stuff in order to save money for their family to be able to come see a show. And I had an experience a few years ago where I met a family with an autistic son named Owen Susskind, and I got a note backstage. They said, would I be in touch with them and with Owen, and that they came to see Mary Poppins, and when Owen realized that I was the voice of Jafar, and he got very excited because he knows all the Disney movies for the last 50 years. So I got involved in another way. That's in addition to all those other things I mentioned. Sometimes things happen in your life and it changes things for you. It changes it up usually for you. And I got very involved with the autism experience and a little bit with the community. And so I ended up working on a project that ended up being a documentary that ended up being nominated for an Academy Award, which is a documentary about Owen, basically. So I tell myself all those things, that there are people that you must be responsible to, number one, and also there are sometimes things that happen when you least expect it to change your life. Now, I don't want to be a Pollyanna about it either. Sometimes I just feel like crap, and if that's the case, I just will call in and say, I feel like crap. I'm not coming in.
Yeah.
I try not to use those sick days for those feelings. I try to use them for when I'm really sick, but occasionally, every now and then.
Mental health days are valid.
Yeah.
Especially when you do what you do. It takes a lot. Okay, how would you tell someone to live their best Broadway life?
You have to be truthful with yourself, first of all, and make sure that you're doing what you're doing for the right reasons, that you really like the work. I've noticed when on the occasion that I have guested at a university and done either, lecturing, questions and answer things, master's classes, that inevitably when it comes to the questions, I can sort of tell by the way the questions are asked if people actually want to have a career because they're interested in acting and they like it, or if they want to become famous.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be clear about that. Do you want to become famous, or do you want to be a good actor? And it's possible to do both, by the way. It's just that your approach may be different. So it's good to know that about yourself. And then I think no matter what you do, you need to be authentic. I think authenticity is very important. In the most ridiculous situation, even in a mythical place called Agrabah, you have to be as authentic to that environment that's been created as you possibly can. How do you find authenticity?
How do you be more authentic?
Well, I think honesty is a big part of authenticity. I think you have to really be honest about what you know and what you don't know, and I think you have to, not have to, I hate to say that, you never have to do anything, but it helps to continue to educate yourself and learn.
Live your best Broadway life.